I want to remind you, if we put everybody knows it now. If you don't know, it's DELF HK. You just got here, I guess. But I will be looking at that tweet stream. So if you do have questions, please tweet your question when we have the final closing panel. Closing panel will be with our 4 keynotes. We'll get them all back up here. And I'm really pleased that they're all ready to answer your questions and mine. So before we get to that, I'm really pleased to be introducing Dr. Jeff Cole, who's the director for the Center for Digital Future at USC Annenberg School of Communications and Journalism. Jeff, I'm going to deviate from the script here. I'll read a little bit if you like. But I met Jeff just about 18 months ago, and he's one of the few speakers who really can get up in front of an audience and speak extemporaneously. And so I've asked him to be the closing keynote because he has diligently been through the conference, as you have, and has heard quite a bit of what's been said. And he also knows so many facts about what is happening through the research that he's doing in many countries around both internet and mobile. And so he can sort of meld the two, what's been said plus what he knows about. And I think you'll really enjoy hearing from him. So if I may, I'll just read a little bit about him. He's been an expert in the field of technology and emerging media in the United States and around the world, talking to governments and leading companies. Actually, whenever I email him, I get an email back from a different location, so I know he has a private plane hidden somewhere. Or he's always on one, as far as I know. And he does live between two coasts, Los Angeles and New York, and he did come here on the nonstop flight from New York. So I thank him for making that journey. So if I may, I'm going to introduce Dr. Jeff Cole, and he's going to talk a little bit about global lessons learned from entrepreneurial opportunities, but also talk about some of the things that he's been seeing and doing at the Center for Digital Future. So Dr. Cole, please. Jeff.
Al, thank you. I appreciate the Dr. Cole. Only my mother calls me Dr. Cole, and I'm serious, and she helped pay for it, so I let her do it. I'm really delighted to be here. What an amazing place Cyberport is. I'm sure I will get to know many of you in the next hour and get to remember you, but if nothing else, I will remember this is the widest room I have ever spoken in. So I've got a lot to say. Hal says I have to be done by about 7:30, so let's not waste any time. And I do want to pick up lots of the threads from all day, but let me take about 2 or 3 minutes and tell you about the work I do. I do that because first you'll understand where my insights and my data come from, and second, all of our work is available for free. I would never stand up here and promote it if we were selling it, and I'll tell you later if you want to access it. But I'm a television guy. I've spent most of my life in the world of television, the most powerful medium ever invented. Spent my life making television, working with networks, studying television, and I was always taught that we blew it with television. We lost a great opportunity. And what I mean by that is television, if you think about it, is the only mass medium we knew ahead of time was going to be a mass medium. There was no question in the 40s and 50s that radio listeners were going to embrace radio with pictures. So since we knew television was going to be this phenomenon before the first signal was even broadcast, what I was taught that we should have done, but didn't do, we should have tracked people before they had television, and then gone back to them year after year as they acquired and used television to see how it changed their lives. And if we had done that, we could have learned simple things, like where did the time for television come from? When people were watching 3 hours a day, and we were asked, where'd those 3 hours come from? What are you doing less of? We didn't know. We just grabbed that time out of the air. We could have learned if the time for television came from talking as a family, reading books or newspapers, sleep, or from some other place. And in the 90s, I became convinced that digital, first the web and now mobile, was going to be far more powerful and important than television. So believing that we blew it with television and that digital was going to be even more important, 15 years ago, we launched this massive project, this tracking of digital that we thought should have been conducted of television in the 40s and 50s. We started in the United States. We took a representative sample of the American population. We've gone back to the same people 15 years in a row and watched as they've gone from non-user to dial-up, from dial-up to broadband. We saw immediately broadband changed everything, not for the reason most people think. It wasn't the speed, though the speed was important. It was the always-on, the direct connection that changed the whole relationship to the internet. We watch globally as 2% drop off each year, and we want to know who leaves and why, and more importantly, do they return, and if so, when and what brings them back. And then 15 years in, we track the never users. Who are the people who have never gone online? Who are they? Why are they not online? How do they do things offline? The rest of us do online, and increasingly they pay more to do those things offline. And then a question we're working with governments all around the world: should we care about the never users? Should we be pushing them online, persuading them, subsidizing them, or should we let them just live their lives peaceably and happily disconnected from the web? So we started this work in the United States. We're now doing it in 46 countries around the world. We've been in China for 13 years. We've been in Hong Kong, I should say countries and regions, excuse me. We've been in China, Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan, as well as a lot of other Asian countries and countries all over the world. And what we have is great data and insight on how this technology is changing the world. So Hal had asked me to pick up some of these themes, combine with some of the things I heard today, to talk a little bit about work, a little bit about things entrepreneurs should know. So let me start with just to bring together a little bit of what we heard and a little bit of what we haven't heard. Talk about just screen time for a minute. In 1975, in most of the developed world, people spent 16 hours a week in front of a screen. Last year, it was 47 hours, and we think it will be at 60 hours in the next 5 to 8 years. But if you just forget the projection, just look at 47, that's over a quarter of all time. If you factor in sleep, it's about a third of all time. Now, in 1975, when it was 16 hours a week in front of a screen, that was one screen in the home on a schedule, television. Now we're looking at 3, or depending on how you count tablets, 4 screens. I think we all globally count screens the same way, but just to be clear, television's the first screen, computers are the second screen, smartphones are the third screen. Movie theater owners have been complaining for about 10 years now, hey, we're the fourth screen. Nobody takes that seriously, probably because you don't own that screen. And when the iPad came out 5 years and 1 month ago, and it's hard to believe that something that has changed the world so much is 5 years old, but it changed the world almost within a year. When the iPad came out, my job was to look at that thing and say, is this the fourth screen, or does it replace the second? And we firmly believe it replaces the second. We think the PC, the laptop are going away, except for 4 to 6% of the population who will continue to use computers. That 4 to 6%, computer-assisted designers, heavy-duty number crunchers, big writers, maybe college students while they're in college. To the rest of us, a PC is a needlessly complex device, takes too long to learn, takes too long to boot, and 1 out of every 30 times encounters the blue screen of death if you're on a PC. Whereas a tablet, you hand a tablet to a 3-year-old boy or an 83-year-old grandmother, both will be using it within 5 minutes. The only difference is the 3-year-old boy will be teaching you things. Boots instantly. If you log off of your computer forgetting to do something, you have to have an internal debate with yourself. Is it important enough to go back and reboot? Whereas with your tablet, if you just close it, and of course it just means shutting the tablet, and you want to go back on, it's a 1-second process and no blue screen of death. So when we look at screens, just to put this in perspective, you heard throughout the day, and I can only echo this, the most important screen clearly is becoming the third screen, the smartphone. You are learning that many people throughout the world, as they go online, go on first with the smartphone. I'll just give you 2 examples, my favorite examples of how important smartphones are, but you know this, just want you to share my view. First, we found people never lose their smartphones. They can be stolen. They can drop them on the street and break. How many of you have ever had a shattered screen on your smartphone? How many of you have ever dropped it in a toilet or a bathtub? You know, you dump it in rice and you don't turn it on for 2 days. But we never lose our smartphones. And the reason we never lose them is that if you leave yours on your seat, and many of you have yours out, and I had mine out when other people were speaking, so we get used to that. But if you leave yours on the seat, you won't make it halfway to that door before you're reaching for it and accessing it. We access these things so many times a day, we can't get far enough away from them to lose them. Whereas if I leave a credit card on a restaurant table, it may take me 4 days to notice it's gone, and I have to retrace my steps. The only time I've ever seen someone lose a smartphone is getting out of a taxi. They were paying the driver, slammed the door, and the taxi was gone in an instant, and they realized it was on the seat. The other example, it's just a personal example of how powerful these things are. I've had one of these big Samsung smartphones, phablets, although I hate that word, for about 3 years, long before Apple had the 6 Plus or the Xiaomi, which was pretty amazing this morning. But so for the last couple of years, Apple users, when they've seen my big phone, have said, "Can I look at your phone?" And the answer is, of course you can look at my phone. And there's nothing on my phone I would object to any of you seeing. There's no dirty pictures, there's no government secrets. But I've noticed that when I hand you my phone, after about 30 seconds, and I say this to myself, I don't say it out loud, but after 30 seconds I start thinking, give it back. That's mine, damn it. It's just uncomfortable. It is the most personal device, and it's not right in anybody else's hands but mine. I mentioned that we think the second screen, the PC, is going away. And interestingly, something that hasn't come up today, not that it should have, but just bring up, we think the screen that is going to change the most in 2015 is the first screen, the oldest screen. Television has just gone in what I call television at the tipping point again, with HBO and Netflix going over the top. We have discovered in the work we do one of the most interesting audiences to track, and I never knew this until we did the work, is college students who just graduated and are getting their first apartments. And that's when they have to decide which things they grew up with they're now willing to pay for themselves and which they're not. And that was where 15 years ago, we saw they weren't getting landline telephones. And it was obvious what was going to happen to landline phones. That's where 13 years ago we saw they weren't subscribing to the printed newspaper, and it was obvious what was going to happen to printed newspapers. And for the last 2 years we've seen they aren't getting television sets. But it's not lack of interest in television. Their interest in television is greater than any generation we've ever seen. They're just watching on a whole different set of devices. And we actually believe one of the advantages of tracking, we think they will get television sets when they have families and want to watch television together. But as single people, they're watching on smartphones and especially on tablets. So moving into a little bit of the work issue and a little bit of some of the things we're changing that entrepreneurs can pay attention to, we see nobody ever wants to give up the internet. There are things about the internet we don't like. Spyware, viruses, spam, none of that cause people to leave. I mentioned a minute ago the 2% who drop off each year. That's not out of dissatisfaction. Those are people whose PCs or smartphones break, haven't gotten around to getting a new one or can't afford, who change jobs and lose access, and they come back quickly. Nobody wants to give up the internet, but we're tired of it defining our lives. Even though so much of it is wireless technology, we're tired of thinking of it like an umbilical cord or a ball and chain. We want to take advantage of all the benefits of this technology without experiencing all the disadvantages. We realize sometimes we couldn't leave the office if we didn't have a smartphone. Sometimes we couldn't go on vacation if we couldn't be reached through a smartphone, but that doesn't mean that you have to be answering that thing 24/7 on vacation. We're looking for balance. We've given a name to this search for balance. We call this enough already. E-NUFF. And enough already is enjoying the benefits without experiencing all the disadvantages. And a couple of examples of enough already. One, I'm somebody who can't go to sleep until I answer all my email. And you know what happens if I answer all my email just before I go to sleep? Damn it, while I'm sleeping, everybody answers me. And I wake up in the morning and it's all sitting there and I'm like the rat in the cage on the wheel, and I can never escape the nagging feeling. For you it may be Facebook or other things. I can never escape the nagging feeling that I've got to sit down and answer all my email. And once again, when you answer all your email, it just produces more email. Work. We've seen for 15 years that of those who use the internet at work, and these numbers haven't changed. The only number that's changed is the percentage of people who use the internet at work. But for 15 years, of those who use the internet at work, 75% say it has made them more productive. 5% say it's made them less productive, and 20% say it hasn't made any difference. So 3/4 say it's made them more productive. People now say, I can do in 30 hours what it used to take 40 hours to do. But the problem's nobody's working 30 hours and calling it a week. We're taking on more work than we've ever taken on before. The lines between work and home have blurred. We're working Saturday night, Sunday morning, New Year's Day, and on all holidays. Sometimes I will hear employers complain about the amount of time their people spend at the office online doing personal things. And when I hear that, I tell them, you should really be quiet and not say a word. Because we see for every hour an employee spends at the office online doing something personal, they're spending 3 hours at home doing work related to their jobs, which is why now in France they've passed laws that say your employer is not allowed to contact you outside of work hours unless they pay you overtime. Because employers have been treating this technology as an umbilical cord to people on weekends, holidays, and late at night. And in France, you are allowed to turn it off the minute you leave the building and not turn it on till the minute you come back the next day or Monday morning. One last example of enough already. It's a personal example. I'm embarrassed to admit that if you went up to my hotel room over at the Le Méridien in Cyberport, you would find in my hotel room 8 charger cables. We have device fatigue. The best example of this I've ever seen was my friend who sent his 16-year-old daughter to London last Christmas on a school tour. Since it was a school tour, they put 3 girls in a room and they put them in older, less expensive hotels. These 3 16-year-old girls get to their room and discover to their absolute horror there are 2 electrical outlets in the room. One outlet with 2 plugs. 3 16-year-old girls, 3 smartphones, 2 digital cameras, 1 laptop, 1 tablet, 2 Bluetooth earpieces, and 3 hair dryers. Although in fairness, hair dryers don't have to be charged. They actually devised a plan that they set their alarm clock for every 90 minutes through the course of the night and would get up every hour and a half and take 2 devices out, put 2 new ones in. But the problem is many devices, starting with iPads, don't fully charge in 90 minutes. So as one girl's less than fully charged device was being removed, she'd scream, "Wait, stop, it's not done." It was like Lord of the Flies in there, if you've read the book. Anyway, so we're looking for balance. And as we talk about looking for balance, I want to pick up another thread that particularly came out of the last panel. All of these companies that are working around us. Fast Company, a year and a half ago, in an incredible slight to Microsoft, and second, with a completely American-centric view, which Americans are prone to, unfortunately, Fast Company named the 4 most important companies were Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Google. And of course, you would add to that Alibaba, Baidu, Tencent. But let's just stay with Fast Company for a minute. And incidentally, I've really been impressed with what's happening at Microsoft. There seems to be life there that we haven't seen. I worked with them for 14 years. There seems to be life we haven't seen. And I think now that they've changed CEOs, they may be back in the game. But if you look at these key players, it's really interesting. First thing that's interesting, and this people touched a little bit on this but didn't say it quite like this, Monty was talking about how they're getting into all these other businesses outside, which is absolutely true. But what I think is really interesting is how they're getting into each other's businesses. How they're all getting into the same businesses. That now Google is getting into shopping. That Facebook has staff search and email. That Amazon went into building phones, spectacularly unsuccessful. One of the few really false moves Amazon has made. And now their Amazon Fire phones, they can't even get people to use it as landfill. They won't even tell you the numbers they sold, but the best estimates are less than 20,000. But they're all getting into each other's businesses. They're all cannibalizing each other's businesses. And it's really interesting how they're going after each other. The other thing that's interesting, also picking up a thread, and you'll catch me in a mistake. I'll even ask somebody to point out my mistake. That those 4 companies, and it's true of the Chinese companies as well, are all products of the 21st century. Now the mistake is what? Mistake is Apple was actually founded in 1976. But I would argue that the Apple of the 20th century never got more than 3% market share for their computers. And I would argue the Apple that we know that's now the most valuable company in the world really began in 2003 when Steve Jobs introduced the iPod and iTunes, and then accelerated in 2007 with the iPhone, and then 2010 with the iPad. And incidentally, just a short digression, and I'm going to tell you one of our predictions. We make lots of predictions, not a terribly important one, and I'm going to look totally wrong next week, and I'm going to look totally wrong for the next year. We believe that a generation that has never worn watches will not wear smartwatches either. Having said that, the Apple Watch will do spectacularly well for the first year. We think people will not replace them. Most people are not going to be interested, but it's going to take a year to see this. The two fundamental problems with the Apple Watch, in my opinion, are one, since the watch is so tiny, the battery is tiny. And the reports are that if you use the phone in the watch, it has a 3-hour battery life. If you just use it for the apps, it has about a 9-hour, and a watch has to go longer than that. And we don't want another device we have to worry about the battery. Second problem with the smartwatch is it requires a Bluetooth connection to a smartphone. And if you've got to have your smartphone on you, you can't go running or exercising without your watch and your smartphone. Why bother? And I've had all these people tell me, I love what the watch is going to do. I'm going to be able to send text. I'm going to be able to make phone calls. And I can do that on my smartphone. But what's interesting about the Apple Watch is that, in the words of one of our comedians in America, Jimmy Kimmel, the price of the smartwatch ranges from $350 to $17,000, depending on how quickly you want to get robbed. But who's going to spend $1,000, $2,000, $10,000 on a watch that you're going to replace in 2 years? You spend $10,000 on a Rolex and you can hand it down to your children. Anyway, so what's interesting about these companies is they're all, and Amazon, of course, a little bit before the 21st century, about 1995. But what's obvious, and this came up a little bit, is that if these 4 companies and then all the Chinese ones have emerged just in the last 15 years, how could we possibly think that's it? Clearly, we don't know. We heard that most of the top 30 will be gone, will not be in the top 30. But clearly, there are going to be new players. My favorite quote of Bill Gates, who's not all that quote-worthy, but my famous quote from Gates was in 1999 when someone asked him, who keeps you awake at night? Is it Intel? Is it AOL? And he very arrogantly and dismissively said, I don't even think about those guys. He said, you know what keeps me awake at night? It's 2 guys in a garage in the Silicon Valley. And he didn't even know it, but he was describing Larry and Sergey. And Google was and has been their worst nightmare. Incidentally, if you ever go, and many of you have, and some of you live in the Silicon Valley, there are now 3 garages in the Silicon Valley that are historical landmarks. The Larry and Sergey Google garage, which was owned by Susan Wojcicki. Anybody want to name the other 2? Gates actually was not in the Silicon. Gates was in his dorm room at Harvard, but the oldest, the one people usually don't get, are the Hewlett-Packard garage from the 1930s and the Jobs-Wozniak garage from the 1970s. The only point is there's a lot more garages in the Silicon Valley. More importantly, there are a lot more garages outside the Silicon Valley in Beijing, although here they're not garages, but the same thing, in Hong Kong and Beijing. And then the most exciting thing, With the next development is it will hopefully be 2 women in a garage in the Silicon Valley or Beijing. Enough of 2 guys in a garage. So moving on just a little bit. So when I get to talk to brands, and I get to talk to a lot of brands every year, when I get to talk to entrepreneurs, media companies, I always get asked for advice. And I'm not arrogant enough to tell them what to do. But I do offer one piece of advice, which I'll share with you. But I offer this advice because I find everybody's nervous about digital technology. Nobody's comfortable. Even the companies that I would argue do it really well, Coca-Cola, Nike, American Express, think they're behind. The ones who are behind know they're behind. About 5 years ago, I was doing an interview on stage at the Google Zeitgeist in Mountain View at the mothership. And I was interviewing the chief marketing officer for one of the biggest consumer packaged good companies on the planet. And I was asking this guy all these questions. He's a friend. I was asking him all these questions about social media and digital strategy, and he really didn't want to answer. And he was being sort of evasive. And I don't know why he agreed to be in the session, but finally, since he was a friend, I turned to him in real frustration, and I said, "Come on, you can admit it. If I got you alone late at night and filled you with alcohol, don't you wish the internet would just go away?" And he said, "No, we love the internet. It puts us in touch with our customers. It teaches us things we've never known." And then as we're walking off stage, he turns to me and he says, "You know, I've never been asked that. You have no idea how often I wish it would go away." Things were so much easier before the internet. Second example, I hope this won't offend anybody. I think it's sort of cute. I was having dinner about 2 years ago with the chief marketing officer of Kimberly-Clark. And if you don't know what Kimberly-Clark does, hold on for a second. And he said to me, "You want to know what we do at Kimberly-Clark? If it leaks from the human body, we sell a product." They make Kleenex, toilet paper, feminine hygiene products. They make Huggies, the diapers for babies, Depend, the diapers, you're not supposed to call them diapers, the undergarments for adults. So he said to me, "Do people really want to have a relationship with the company that makes their toilet paper?" And the answer is an emphatic yes. People have a lot to say about toilet paper, incidentally. People want to know which way to hang it, how much to use. The innovation of taking the tube out came from customers. But the point is, if people want to have a relationship with the company that makes their toilet paper, they want to have a relationship with everyone. So the advice I offer to you, to anyone, is your learning curve must be steeper than your action curve. Your job is to study, watch, participate, track. You don't have to invest. You don't have to commit. You have to learn. 6 years ago, I was telling every person who would listen to me, every entrepreneur, every brand, learn everything there is to learn about Second Life, the virtual reality community where you have an avatar, where General Motors built an island. Well, within a year, I was saying to anybody who would listen to me, if you're on Second Life, get the hell out as fast as you possibly can. It was filled with terrorism, bank thefts, sleaze, pornography. There was a woman being interviewed about 2 years ago complaining. She said, "My husband spends all his time in Second Life. He has a wife in Second Life. They have sex. They go shopping." She seemed much more annoyed that they went shopping than that they had sex. And then she admitted, "But you know, he's never met this woman. He's never talked to her on the phone. Do I have a problem?" I think she did. But the job was to get on, and if you follow my advice, 70% of your effort will be wasted, but it won't really be wasted. Twitter. When I first heard of Twitter, it was the stupidest thing I had ever heard of. I don't care what you had for lunch yesterday, with two exceptions. If you had the best meal of your life, I'd like to hear about that. And if you went to my favorite restaurant and you got sick, I need to hear about that. But other than that, I don't care what you had for lunch. Then we learned the first reports of terrorism in Mumbai came from Twitter. Twitter has now become an indispensable news source. Twitter is probably the best customer service tool ever created. Twitter has changed how Hollywood releases movies. Hollywood, if they know they have a bad film historically, they would not show it to critics, heavily market it. It would take 4 days for word of mouth to kill it. Twitter can now kill a bad film in 30 minutes. And there are lots of examples of that. So those are the past examples, and Twitter, of course, has played an incredibly powerful political role. So the key is, even if you think something's stupid, you need to learn it. You need to be on it. You don't have to have a Twitter policy. So moving forward, I'm a big believer, even though it's stalled at the moment, in Google Glass. I think what Google Glass is trying to do is very powerful. What it's trying to do is very simple. When I started my work, everybody connected to the internet with a PC on the desk and a hard wire to the wall. The first mobile internet we saw in 2003 and 4 was Wi-Fi and laptops, which let you put the internet literally on your laptop. Then smartphones put it here, near our eyes. And all Google Glass does is take it from here and put it here. Now, some of my cynical friends say that's just a stopgap measure until we implant the chip in the brain. But the idea of having the internet here is very powerful. So I work with some of the biggest retailers in the world. And I say to them, you don't have to have a Google Glass policy. You have to go out and buy 3 pairs. And you have to understand what you do. And it may not be Google Glass. It may be some later iteration. You have to understand what the internet here means. How will your business change if in 5 years all of your customers walk in wearing Google Glass? How will your business change if all of your employees are wearing Google Glass? Some of the companies I work with, I say, let's set up a laboratory. And you can see their eyes roll, because when most people set up laboratories, they want $2 million. What I want to set up a laboratory is an empty room and $15,000. Because for all I need in a laboratory is 2 or 3 pairs of Google Glass, a bunch of wristbands, which we saw the Xiaomi are $20, a couple 3D printers, and to begin to really learn, because 3D printers for retail may be the biggest threat they've ever faced, or it may be the greatest opportunity. The biggest threat is that if we all have 3D printers, and you can buy them, not the good ones yet, for $500, but if the good ones are $1,500 now, you know what they're going to cost in 2 years. The threat is we all have them, and instead of going to the store, we print out our office supplies and some of the things we buy. The opportunity is, if most people don't want 3D printers and instead go online to the store, call for it to be printed. It's made at the store with an industrial machine, and we go pick it up, and it changes the whole parts inventory stores have to have. The place that's going to be transformed by 3D printers is auto parts, where you're going to be able to buy parts for cars 70 years old, and parts are just made on demand and can be printed at your home or in the store. But the technology, the one that doesn't come up, and everything I'm talking about's here. Let me just talk about one that's not, it's sort of here, but not quite. My favorite technology, the one I will invest in, that I think, I'm not recommending specific investments, just generically, but the one that I think is going to change the world is driverless cars. Driverless cars have done 3 million miles in California. Not a single incident, or actually I should say the only incident, have been people freaking out when they see the driverless cars. Google has been testing them, has had to hire people to sit in the driver's seat and pretend they're driving. They're of course not allowed to touch anything. Driverless cars are now legal in California. And we're starting to see, Tesla says they're going to make one. Mercedes says they're going to make one. What you're going to notice first is the entire design of cars is going to change. The attention is going to be where it's never been before, in the back seat. The back seat's going to be a big sofa, so you can throw yourself out of your bed, jump in the car, and sleep in most cities for another half hour. If you're in Los Angeles, another hour. And it's going to also be a desk where you'll be able to work and all of your documents will be in the cloud, an entertainment center with all of your movies and television in the cloud. And a woman in China pointed out to me, there'll also be a big mirror so you can do your makeup, so instead of having to see the women driving or going like this in the rear view mirror. Your car will drop you off at work. It will come back and get you at the time you told it, which of course you can override, and it will go park somewhere free or cheap. Your car will take your kids to school and to all of their appointments. Your kids will have a wristband, or if they're old enough, a smartphone with an app, so when the car pulls up, only they can get in the car to ensure their safety. Will mean the end of the awkward conversation with your parents and grandparents where you have to take the car keys away. It will be the end of drunk driving because we'll have designated cars rather than designated drivers. Starting to see some of the industries that will be displaced, starting with lawyers with drunk driving. I believe, and actually I was thrilled to see Elon Musk said this last week as well, I believe we're going to get to the point in 30 years where we will not let human beings drive. I have friends who say, I'll never tolerate that. I love driving. Well, I have friends who love riding horses. But you can't ride horses through the CBD in Hong Kong. If you want to ride a horse, you go to a farm or a ranch. And I think in 30 years, if you want to drive a car, you go to a track. Because if we don't let people drive cars, it's the end of auto insurance, another industry that will change. It's the end of death on the highway. In the United States, 35,000 people a year die. In China, it's 5 times that. It's probably proportionate in Hong Kong. It also means it doesn't eliminate traffic, but improves traffic a little bit because cars can get closer together because they're controlled through computers. And of course, this did come up today, and just to build on that, when my car drops me off at work, it makes no sense that it's my car all day sitting there. Because what obviously is already starting to happen is when my car drops me off at work, it then becomes your car. And then the car that comes back and gets me at the end of the day may by coincidence be my car, but probably not. I can get into any car. It will automatically sync with my smartphone so that I'm already my documents and things from the cloud come down. And what we will probably do, since some of us like fancy cars, some of us just view cars as transportation, we'll probably be able to buy 3 or 4 levels of car. The cheapest level, which is just basic transportation, and some people will buy very luxurious cars. So I think the changes are going to be profound. The last thing I want to do, and I know we're running out of time, and I could talk forever, but you probably figured that out already. Since we are talking about entrepreneurs, and since on the last session it was when do you get investors, we have been on record, and I won't get into this, we had predicted in 2005 that when Rupert Murdoch bought MySpace, he would never hang on to his teenage users. I had said, I wasn't trying to be quoted, that to a teenager, an online community is like a nightclub. And when the nightclub becomes too popular or the uncool kids show up, you're out of there. And I had said, what's the worst thing that could happen to you as a teenager in a nightclub? Not literally the worst. That would be somebody with a bomb or a gun walking in. But to most teenagers, the worst thing that could happen is their mother walks in. And now your mother wants to friend you on Facebook. So we were right about MySpace in '09. I said the same thing will happen to Facebook, but it will never die. It will survive forever as the phone directory to the planet. And Facebook fought that for a long time, but they finally have conceded that they're losing their teenage audience. And when they did, we put out a press release taking a little bit of credit and saying that because back, I should say, in 2013, when there was evidence that showed Tumblr had become more popular than Facebook, I had all these reporters call and say, so is Tumblr the new Facebook? And I said, you're missing the point. Tumblr is the Facebook of 2013. I would argue Snapchat is the Facebook of 2015. So when we issued our press release, I said Zuckerberg's going to have to open his wallet all the time. We never thought he would quite open it the way he did. Keep in mind that Apple, which is sitting on $160 billion, has never made an acquisition more than $1 billion until they just bought Beats recently. And Zuckerberg has tried to spend $25 billion in the last 2 years, actually spent 22. I'll explain what I mean. So what I want to do with my last 3 minutes is play my favorite game, Genius or Idiot. And we'll start with Jonathan Abrams, the founder of Friendster. Any former Friendsters in here? There should be a couple. There's nothing embarrassing. It was a good network back then. Just one? Oh, okay, but yeah, there should be about 7 or 8. Incidentally, I gave a talk in Bali about 3 years ago talking about the death of Friendster. And 2 very nice people came up to me, handed me their Friendster business cards, and said, we're huge in the Philippines. And I looked into it. Indeed, they are. Nowhere else. So Jonathan Abrams, founder of Friendster, turns down $1 billion from Google for Friendster. I like Jonathan, so I'll let you answer that question. Mark Zuckerberg, who I do not have to tell you who he is, turns down $1 billion from Yahoo. And a lot of people told him he was an idiot. And how do you know when both offered $1 billion, do you take it or not take it? Abrams didn't, and sadly looks like an idiot. Zuckerberg doesn't, and looks like a genius, considering that he personally is worth $30 billion. Andrew Mason, the founder of Groupon, turns down $8 billion from Google for Groupon, which almost implodes shortly after he turns down $8 billion. Sadly, clearly not a genius. The founders, I can never remember their name, but it doesn't matter. The founders of Instagram and Tumblr. Instagram takes $1 billion from Facebook. Tumblr takes just under $1 billion from Yahoo. Both look like geniuses, but hold on to that thought for just a moment. I'm going to come back to that. And then the fascinating case of Evan Spiegel. At the time, 21-year-old kid in Santa Monica turns down $3.1 billion from Facebook for Snapchat. And how could you not say to a 21-year-old who turned down $3.1 billion that he wasn't an idiot? But I happen to know him since he's a neighbor, if not well, a little bit. And he would tell you, he grew up wealthy, he would tell you, I get it. I may never make that kind of money again, but I don't want to work for anybody. But it turns out that Snapchat's now worth $16 billion, and he's doing very, very well. And then the founders of WhatsApp, who get $19 billion from Facebook. Genius or idiot doesn't even apply. The only thing you can say to the founders of WhatsApp is, luckiest bastards who ever lived. a deal I don't understand. I mean, that's something that in their DNA, they say they will never accept advertising. In some parts of the world, they get a free year and then $1 a year, although I just renewed it for 5 years for 75 cents a year. And in many parts of the world, it's free forever. And he pays $19 billion. That was, instead of you're counting for Zuckerberg, it was $19 billion for WhatsApp. It was $1 billion for Instagram. It was $2.1 billion for Oculus, virtual reality, another one of those things you should be learning curve. And then he tried to buy Snapchat for $3.1 billion. And the only thing I said was we go back and visit Instagram and Tumblr for a minute. You can't fault those guys and call them idiots for taking $1 billion. But all of a sudden, when you look at WhatsApp for 19, Instagram at 1, and Tumblr at 1, doesn't look like quite as great a deal as it looked like at the time. So things are changing. I don't know how, it's fun to play the game. I don't know how you answer the question, when do you take it and when don't you? And I guess the larger part of the question is, do you want to work for somebody else? But we really believe we're going to see all these new players. In the US, I haven't seen it as much in China yet. We're seeing Yik Yak. And of course, this Chinese discussion, totally cognizant of what was Weibo has now become WeChat, and everything in China, I mentioned Tencent, Baidu, Alibaba, is on a scale we've never seen before. And I don't think we've even gotten into not the home stretch, but even into the middle of the stretch as to how big these Chinese companies will be. And it really was impressive and inspiring to see Xiaomi, a company 5 years ago that was nothing, and now is causing Samsung and even Apple in some ways to shake a bit. So anyway, that's a little of the stuff we do. Anyone who's interested in our work is welcome to go to our website, where I said all the reports globally are free. Our website is just digitalcenter.org. Center spelled the American way, or as I like to say, the right way. And with that, thank you. I could not have had a better time, and I guess I'm staying up here.
Don't go any further.